They told her to stand near the wall. Not sit, not speak, just stand like something that belonged to the building, not the people inside it. The music was loud enough to hide humiliation, but not loud enough to erase it. Please, her husband whispered through clenched teeth, his smile frozen for anyone watching. Just stay here, don't ruin this for me. For a moment, she thought she hadn't heard him right. 52 years of marriage, and this was what she had become, a risk to be managed. She nodded anyway, not because she agreed, but because she had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the sharpest blade. The ballroom glittered with money. Crystal glasses, polished shoes, dresses that cost more than the house she once raised 3 children in. Everyone belonged somewhere in that room, everyone except her. She felt it in the way people's eyes slid past her, the way conversations bent around her presence as if she were empty air. Her name was Alina Hayes, but tonight no one needed to know that. Her husband, Richard, moved easily through the crowd. His laugh was louder than usual, his confidence rehearsed. He introduced himself as a self-made man, a consultant, a survivor. He did not introduce his wife, not once. Alina watched him from her corner. She remembered when that same man used to come home with grease on his hands and fear in his eyes, when his dreams were too big for his bank account, and his confidence lived entirely on borrowed faith, hers. She remembered when he used to say her name like it anchored him to the world. Now he said nothing at all. A waiter passed her with a tray of champagne. He didn't ask if she wanted one. She didn't stop him. Her fingers curled slowly, deliberately, around the strap of her old handbag. Inside it were things no one in this room would guess she carried: documents, memories, proof. She hadn't brought them for drama. She hadn't even planned to use them. She had come because Richard said it was important. Because he said, "It's a big night for me." Because she still believed, foolishly, that marriage meant showing up even when you were asked to disappear. Across the room, a ripple moved through the guests. Not laughter, attention. Alina followed the direction of their gaze. A man had entered. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. Power followed him the way gravity follows planets. Conversations dimmed, smiles sharpened, spines straightened. The CEO. Alina didn't know his name yet, but she knew the type. Men like him didn't chase approval. They owned the room by standing still inside it. He paused just past the entrance, scanning faces, not casually, not politely. He was looking for something. When his eyes reached Alina, he stopped. Not politely, not briefly. He froze. It was subtle, most people missed it. But Alina saw it, because she had spent a lifetime noticing small changes before disasters. His breath caught, his hand tightened at his side, and then slowly, impossibly, his expression shifted. Recognition, not the kind that comes from memory alone, but from debt. Alina felt something twist in her chest, sharp and unexpected. No, it couldn't be. The man took a step toward her, then another. Richard noticed. He followed the man's line of sight and saw Alina standing there, small, still out of place. His stomach dropped. He moved quickly, intercepting the CEO with practiced urgency. "Sir," Richard said, laughing too loudly. Extending a hand. "Richard Hayes, such an honor." The CEO didn't take his hand. He didn't even look at him. His eyes never left Alina. "Is she with you?" the CEO asked quietly. The question landed like a crack in glass. Richard swallowed. Yes, my wife." "Alina, she prefers not to be in the spotlight." Alina almost smiled. The CEO tilted his head slightly. "Is that what she prefers?" Silence pressed in around them. People nearby leaned closer, pretending not to listen. Alina felt every year of her age in that moment. The years of cooking, budgeting, sacrificing, forgiving. The years of being introduced as my wife without a story attached. The years of watching men like Richard take credit for things they survived only because someone else held the ground beneath them. She met the CEO's eyes fully now. And he knew. He stepped around Richard as if he weren't there. "Alina Hayes," he said, his voice steady but thick with something dangerously close to reverence. "I've been looking for you for 20 years. The room seemed to inhale. Richard laughed, sharp and brittle. "I think there's been some mistake." "There hasn't," the CEO said. Alina felt heat crawl up her spine. She hadn't heard her full name spoken with that weight in decades. "I didn't know if you were alive." The man continued. "I didn't know where you disappeared to, but I never forgot you." Richard's face drained of color. Alina spoke before fear could stop her. "You shouldn't," she said softly. "You had a life to build." The CEO shook his head. "I built it because of you." Whispers erupted. Richard stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time, and not liking what he saw. "What is this?" he hissed under his breath. "Alina, don't embarrass me." She turned to him then. Really turned. "I've been standing where you told me to stand." She said calmly, "I haven't embarrassed you, I've simply existed." The CEO looked between them, understanding forming fast and ugly. "You didn't tell them who she is," he said. Richard forced a smile. "She's being modest." Alina's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I helped him once," she said, nodding toward the CEO. "A long time ago, that's all." "That's not all," the CEO said. And now his voice carried. "That woman signed the papers that saved my company when no one else would. That woman mortgaged her home so I could pay my employees. That woman taught me the difference between profit and responsibility." Faces turned fully now, glasses lowered, the room leaned in. Richard's lips parted, but no sound came out. Alina felt something inside her loosen, a knot she hadn't realized she'd been carrying for years. "I didn't do it for recognition," she said. "I did it because someone needed help. And because of that," the CEO said, "thousands of people have jobs today." He turned to the crowd. "If you're celebrating success tonight, you're standing on her generosity." The weight of that truth settled heavily. Richard's knees buckled slightly. He steadied himself on a table. Alina watched him struggle and felt no triumph, only clarity. She had shrunk herself for him for decades. And still, it hadn't been enough. The CEO offered her his arm. "Come," he said gently. "You don't belong against a wall." Alina hesitated. Not because she was afraid, but because stepping forward meant leaving something behind forever. Then she took his arm. As they walked, conversations parted for them. Respect replaced curiosity. People looked at her, not as an accessory, not as an inconvenience, but as a woman whose choices had mattered. Richard followed a few steps behind, his world collapsing silently. Near the center of the room, Alina stopped. She turned back to him. "You asked me not to ruin your night," she said. "I didn't." She looked around at the chandeliers, the people, the life he wanted. "You did that yourself." The CEO stayed beside her, unmoving. And for the first time in a very long time, Alina Hayes was no longer invisible. This was only the beginning. The silence after her words was heavier than any applause. People didn't know what to do with a truth that arrived without shouting. Alina felt it first in her shoulders, the strange release of not holding herself smaller anymore. She hadn't raised her voice, she hadn't accused. She had simply stood in the open. And somehow, that was enough to crack the room. The CEO remained beside her, not touching now, but close enough that no one doubted where he stood. His presence acted like a boundary no one dared cross. Richard was still behind them, not following, hovering. The man who once filled every room with his confidence now seemed unsure where to place his feet. His eyes darted from face to face, searching for reassurance, for someone to laugh this off, to reduce it to a misunderstanding. He found none. Someone near the bar coughed. Another guest pretended to check their phone. The party continued in fragments, but something essential had broken. The illusion that status could erase history had fractured right in front of them. The CEO turned slightly toward Alina. His voice dropped, meant only for her. "You shouldn't have been treated that way." She didn't answer immediately. She was watching Richard, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with the quiet observation of someone finally seeing the full shape of a truth. He looked smaller now, not physically, internally, like a man whose reflection no longer agreed with the story he'd been telling himself. "He didn't start this way," she said at last. "None of them do." The CEO nodded once. He understood more than she had expected. "May I ask you something?" he said. She met his gaze. "You already have. Why didn't you ever reach out?" The question didn't sting. It simply landed. Alina considered it carefully, because it deserved honesty. "Because I didn't save you, so you would owe me," she said, "and because life doesn't always leave room for pride. I had children, responsibilities, a husband who needed me in ways he never noticed." The CEO exhaled slowly. "I searched for years. Your name disappeared, records changed. I thought maybe you didn't want to be found." She almost smiled at that. "I didn't know how," she said. "And after a while, I thought it no longer mattered." Around them, guests were slowly returning to conversation, though nothing sounded the same. Alina felt eyes on her back, not curious now, but cautious. Respect often arrived disguised as restraint. A woman approached hesitantly. Someone Alina vaguely recognized as a friend of Richard's from years ago. Her expression was polite but uncertain. "I had no idea," the woman said. "I mean, you must be incredibly proud." Alina held her gaze. "I'm tired." She replied, "But thank you." The woman flushed slightly and retreated. Richard finally found his voice. "This is getting out of hand," he said, stepping forward, lowering his tone as if that might regain control. "We can talk about this at home." Home. The word felt distant, almost theoretical. The CEO turned to him fully for the first time. His expression wasn't angry. It was measured, which was worse. "You told her to stand against a wall," he said. "You hit her." Richard bristled. "You don't know our marriage." "No," the CEO agreed, "but I know how power works. And I know when someone uses it to shrink another person." Alina felt something shift again, this time inside Richard. A tightening, a defensive instinct sharpening into resentment. "She chose to stay," he snapped. "No one forced her." Alina stepped forward before the CEO could respond. "I stayed," she said calmly, "because I believed loyalty was louder than recognition. I was wrong." That hurt him more than any accusation. Richard's mouth opened, then closed. He looked around, suddenly aware of the audience he no longer commanded. "I built everything I have," he said, louder now, defiant. "I didn't ask for help." Alina didn't argue. She simply said, "You accepted it." The distinction hung there, undeniable. The CEO glanced at his watch, then back at Alina. "Would you be willing to step outside with me for a moment?" he asked. "There's something I want to show you." Richard stiffened. "She's not going anywhere." Alina turned to him slowly. "I am," she said, "and you don't get to decide that anymore." That was the moment something broke completely. Not dramatically, not loudly, but irreversibly. They moved toward the terrace doors. The air outside was cool, sharp, honest, the noise of the party dulled behind them, like a memory losing relevance. The city stretched below, lights stacked on lights, lives intersecting without permission. Alina rested her hands on the railing, breathing deeply. "I never imagined you like this," she said quietly. The CEO joined her, leaving space between them. "I never imagined surviving," he replied. "You did more than invest money. You invested trust. That kind of thing changes people." She looked at him then, really looked. The boy she once knew was gone, but not erased. He had simply learned how to carry weight. "I didn't come tonight expecting this," she said. "Neither did I," he admitted, "but I'm glad you did." Inside, Richard stood frozen, watching through the glass. He saw something he had never seen before. His wife in conversation, where she was not an extension of him, but a center of gravity herself. It terrified him. On the terrace, the CEO reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. "I kept this," he said, handing it to her. "Your signature is on it." Alina unfolded it slowly. She remembered the night she signed it. The kitchen table, the children asleep. Richard pacing, nervous, unconvinced. The pen shaking in her hand, not from fear, but from the knowledge that once given, some things never return. "You didn't have to keep it," she said. "I did," he replied. "Because when people ask me where this all started, I point to that paper." She handed it back. "It belongs to you now." "No," he said gently. "It belongs to history." They stood in silence for a moment longer. Inside, the party tried to recover. Laughter rose, forced and uneven, but Richard no longer heard it. All he could see was the shape of a future rearranging itself without his consent. Alina straightened. "I should go back in," she said. The CEO studied her. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she replied. "Running away is what I used to do. Tonight I'm walking." They re-entered together. Conversations paused again, briefly. Richard turned as they approached. His face tight, his eyes searching hers for something familiar. He found none. Alina stopped a few feet from him. "This doesn't have to be ugly," she said, "but it will be honest." He swallowed. "You're choosing him over me." She shook her head. "I'm choosing myself." The words landed with finality. The CEO stepped back slightly, allowing the space between husband and wife to exist without interference. He didn't need to dominate the moment. The truth was doing that on its own. Richard looked around one last time, at the room, the people, the life he had curated so carefully. And for the first time, he realized something he had avoided for years. None of it had ever belonged to him alone. Alina felt no triumph, only the steady, undeniable sense that something long delayed had finally arrived. And whatever came next, it would not require her to stand against a wall ever again. Alina did not leave the party that night, not because she wanted to stay, but because leaving would have meant slipping quietly back into the role she had already outgrown. She stood near the center of the room now, not speaking, not performing, simply existing without permission. The difference was immediate. People adjusted their distance, their tone, the direction of their attention. Respect did not announce itself, it reorganized the space. Richard avoided her eyes. He spoke to no one. The man who once thrived on being seen now hovered at the edges of conversations, unsure how to enter them without the story he had lost control of. The CEO excused himself briefly, pulled away by obligations that came with his position. Eleanor watched him go without anxiety. She did not need him as a shield. Something inside her had already shifted into place. A young server approached with a glass of water this time. She accepted it, nodding in thanks. Her hands were steady. Memory began to surface, not suddenly, but in layers, like a tide that no longer needed to ask permission to rise. She remembered the first apartment, the peeling paint, the sound of the radiator clicking at night. Richard had come home that evening with his shoulders hunched, eyes too bright. They said no, he had told her. Every bank, every investor. She had listened, not interrupted, not panicked. Then she had opened the folder she kept hidden under the bed. Not savings. Emergency. She had inherited a modest amount years earlier. Nothing extravagant, enough to change a direction. Not a destiny she had never told anyone. Not even Richard. Money changed people when it arrived without warning. But that night, she had placed the folder on the table between them. Try again, she had said. Richard had stared at it as if it might disappear. I can't ask you to do that. I know, she had replied. That's why I'm offering. He had taken the money, not all of it. Just enough to keep hope breathing. That was how it always started. Quiet decisions, no witnesses. At the party, laughter rose again somewhere behind her. It felt distant, like music from another life. Another memory surfaced. The hospital, the CEO, then a young man with tired eyes and a voice too thin for the responsibility he carried, had stood beside her in the hallway. The company was collapsing, employees were leaving, lawyers were circling. I don't know how to save it, he had said. Eleanor had looked at him for a long moment. She had seen something familiar there, the same fear she had once seen in Richard, but also something Richard had lost along the way. Integrity. Tell me the truth, she had said. He had all of it, no excuses, no embellishments. That was why she had signed the papers. Not because the idea was safe, but because the man was honest. Back in the ballroom, Eleanor took a slow breath. She realized she had spent most of her life standing at the edges of other people's turning points, steadying them, then stepping back before anyone noticed the ground had shifted. She felt a presence beside her. Not the CEO. Richard. He didn't speak immediately. He stood too close. The way he used to, when he wanted to reclaim control without asking for it. You planned this, he said finally, low and sharp. She turned to him. I didn't plan to be disrespected. You let him talk about our private life. He continued, you embarrassed me. Her voice remained even. You did that when you decided I was something to hide. He laughed once, bitter. You always exaggerate. She looked at him for a long moment. In that space, she saw the man she had married and the man he had become. The distance between them was no longer painful. It was informative. I minimize myself for you, she said. That wasn't exaggeration. That was survival. Richard's jaw tightened. So what now? You walk away, after everything I built. She didn't correct him. She didn't need to. I don't know what happens now, she said honestly, but I know what doesn't. He stared at her as if waiting for her to soften. She didn't. Across the room, the CEO returned. His expression composed, but his eyes alert. He noticed the tension immediately, but he did not interrupt. He trusted Eleanor to handle her own gravity. That trust mattered more than she expected. A woman approached Eleanor, older than most in the room, wearing a simple necklace and an expression that carried years. I want to apologize, the woman said quietly. I saw you earlier. I didn't say anything. Eleanor nodded. You're saying something now. The woman's lips pressed together. You reminded me of my mother. She did everything quietly too. Eleanor felt something warm and unfamiliar spread through her chest. That's how it survives, she said, quietly. The woman left, visibly affected. Richard watched the exchange, unsettled. He had always underestimated how much power lived in restraint. The CEO stepped closer then. They're asking me to make a speech. He said softly, I don't have to. Eleanor considered it. If you do. She said, make it about responsibility, not me. He studied her, then nodded, as you wish. When he moved toward the stage, the room followed his motion instinctively. Attention pooled where he stood. Eleanor stayed where she was. The CEO spoke briefly. He did not name her. He did not dramatize. He spoke about choices made in obscurity, about people whose names never appeared on buildings, but whose fingerprints were everywhere. As he spoke, Elena felt something settle, not pride, not validation, but recognition of a truth she had always known. Some lives are scaffolding. They hold everything up while remaining unseen. When the speech ended, applause filled the room. It was not wild, it was thoughtful. Richard did not clap. He watched Elena instead, and for the first time, fear outweighed resentment. Not fear of losing her, fear of being seen clearly. Elena set her glass down and picked up her handbag. Not because she was leaving, but because it was time. She looked at Richard one last time. "You never asked who I was before you," she said. "Tonight you found out." Then she walked toward the doors. The CEO did not follow. He understood. This was her movement. As Elena stepped into the cooler air outside, she felt the weight of decades loosen, not fall away, but redistribute. She had carried it alone for so long. She had forgotten it could shift. The night did not applaud her. It simply made room. And somewhere behind her, a man who had built his life on her silence finally understood what it cost to lose it. The morning after the party arrived without drama. No headlines, no urgent calls, no sudden reversals, just light through the window and the quiet truth that something fundamental had changed. Elena woke early, as she always did. Habit did not dissolve just because purpose had shifted. She sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of tea she did not rush to drink. The house felt unfamiliar, not because it was different but because she was. Richard had not come home until dawn. When he did, he moved through the hallway carefully, as if noise itself might accuse him. Elena heard him pause outside the bedroom, then continue on. He slept in the guest room. That detail mattered less than it once would have. Later, when he emerged, tie already loosened though he had nowhere to go. He spoke as if continuing a conversation that had never been finished. "You enjoyed humiliating me," he said. Elena did not look up from the paper she was reading. "No," she replied. "I endured being minimized. There's a difference." He scoffed. "You think one night changes everything." She folded the paper neatly. "No. One night reveals what years were hiding." Richard paced. The house felt too small for his frustration. "People are calling, asking questions. You made me look like I don't exist without you." She met his eyes then. "You existed. You just chose to erase me." Silence followed, not a pause, an ending. Later that afternoon, Elena left the house, not to escape, to move. She walked without destination, letting the city pull her where it would. Shop windows reflected her differently now, not younger, not grander but more exact. She recognized herself. Her phone rang once. She did not answer. At a small cafe, she sat by the window. The server smiled and asked her name for the cup. Elena hesitated, then said it clearly. When the cup arrived, the name was spelled wrong. She smiled anyway. Some things took time. Across town, Richard sat in his office, an office he had once been proud of. Calls went unanswered. Emails waited longer than usual. He felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Irrelevance. At the cafe, Elena's phone rang again. This time she answered. The CEO's voice came through, calm and unintrusive. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "You're not," she said. "I wanted to ask how you're doing." He continued. "And to tell you, nothing from last night will be used without your consent." She appreciated that more than he knew. "Thank you," she said, "but some things don't belong to me alone anymore." They spoke briefly, no plans, no pressure. When the call ended, Elena remained where she was, watching people pass. She noticed how many of them looked as though they were walking while carrying something too heavy for no one to notice. In the following days, shifts appeared quietly. Richard's invitation slowed. A meeting was postponed. A consultant didn't return a message. People were polite but distant. Power, she realized, did not disappear. It withdrew. At home, tension thickened the air. Conversations shortened. Shared routines dissolved. Elena cooked less. Richard noticed but did not comment. One evening, he finally asked, "What do you want?" She considered the question carefully. "Space," she said, "and truth." He nodded as if that were reasonable, though it frightened him. That night, Elena opened the handbag she had carried to the party. She removed the documents she had never intended to show. She read through them slowly, not to relive the past, but to understand what she had preserved without knowing it. Not leverage, legacy. She placed them back inside. The next morning, she made a decision she did not announce. She visited a lawyer, not to destroy, to define. The office was small, unassuming. The woman behind the desk listened without interruption as Elena spoke. When she finished, the lawyer nodded. "You've been generous," she said, "more than required." Elena replied, "I don't regret generosity. I regret invisibility. When she left, she felt lighter, not because conflict had ended, but because direction had returned. Richard sensed it that evening. You're planning something, he said. I'm preparing, she corrected. For what? For being seen accurately. He had no response to that. That weekend, Alina attended a small gathering, not a party. Not a spectacle, just people. Real conversations. She spoke when she wanted, listened when she didn't. No one introduced her as anyone's wife. She introduced herself. When she returned home that night, Richard was waiting. I've been offered a position, he said quickly, as if speed might restore importance. Out of state, it could be a fresh start. She studied him. For who? For us, he said. She shook her head gently. You still don't understand. He clenched his fists. Then explain it to me. I already have, she said. You just weren't listening. The distance between them no longer hurt. It clarified. Alina went to bed that night knowing something he did not. The ground beneath their marriage had shifted, and only one of them had learned how to stand on it. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent and wide. And somewhere in that movement, the quiet consequences of truth were beginning to take shape. The shift became visible the following week, not in headlines or announcements, but in the way doors hesitated before opening for Richard, in the way conversations ended a fraction earlier than expected, in the way his name, once spoken with easy confidence, now required context. Alina noticed without comment. She had learned that consequences rarely arrived with noise. They arrived with pattern. One morning, a courier delivered a thick envelope addressed to her. The return label bore a legal firm's name she recognized, but had never contacted. Inside were documents she had signed decades earlier, rescued from archives, restored with care. Attached was a brief note. You were listed as a silent guarantor. Your consent is now required. Alina sat at the table for a long time, the envelope unopened beside her tea, not because she was afraid of what it meant, but because she understood exactly how much weight it carried. Across the house, Richard paced while speaking into his phone. His voice rose and fell, frustration sharpening every word. He ended the call abruptly and stared at Alina as if she were responsible for the silence on the other end. You knew, he said. She didn't ask what he meant. I knew what I did, she replied. You could have told me. You never asked. That ended the conversation. Later that day, Alina met the CEO again, not in a ballroom, not in public view, but in a modest conference room with no windows and no drama. He did not sit at the head of the table. He did not bring assistants. He brought respect. I need your signature, he said. But more than that, I need your perspective. She skimmed the papers carefully, not as a formality, as someone who understood responsibility from the inside. This will change things, she said. Yes, he replied, for both of us. She signed, not for power, for closure. When she returned home, Richard was waiting again. His jacket lay untouched over the chair. His confidence was thinner now, stretched over something fragile. They're restructuring, he said. People I trained are suddenly distant. Alina removed her shoes calmly. That happens when foundations are examined. You're enjoying this, he accused. No, she said. I'm recognizing it. He stared at her, searching for cruelty. He found none. That frightened him more. Over the next days, the world continued to adjust. An invitation was rescinded. A partnership dissolved quietly. Richard began to realize that what he thought was loyalty had always been proximity to power, and that power had never been his alone. Alina moved through her days with intention. She attended meetings when invited, declined when not interested. Her presence was no longer ornamental. It was considered. One afternoon, a journalist reached out, not to Richard, but to her. Alina declined politely. Some stories needed time before being told. That night, Richard finally asked the question he had avoided. Are you leaving me? Alina didn't answer immediately. She folded the blanket she had been holding, smoothing the edges carefully. I already left the version of us where I disappeared. She said, what remains depends on what you're willing to see. He sat down heavily. The fight had drained out of him. I don't know how to be the man you're becoming, he said. She looked at him with something like compassion. I never asked you to follow me. I asked you not to erase me. Silence settled between them, not tense now, but final in its clarity. In the days that followed, Richard accepted the out-of-state position. He told himself it was opportunity, not retreat. Alina did not correct him. On the morning he left, he paused at the door. You were always stronger than me, he said quietly. She shook her head. I was always myself. When the door closed behind him, Alina did not cry. She opened the windows instead. The air moved through the house, lifting dust, shifting shadows. The space felt larger, not empty, available. Later, she walked through the city without urgency. She noticed how often people made room for her now, without knowing why. Authority, she realized, often came from alignment rather than assertion. She met the CEO briefly that afternoon. They spoke about governance, about accountability, about succession. He listened more than he spoke. At the end of the meeting, he said, "You don't owe me anything." She nodded, "I know." As she stepped back into the street, Alina felt something settle firmly in place. Not victory, equilibrium. The world had not bent to her will. It had simply corrected itself. And for the first time, she was standing exactly where she belonged, without shrinking, without borrowing strength, without asking permission. The weeks that followed unfolded quietly, but unmistakably. No grand announcements, no confrontations designed for spectacle, just the steady ripple of consequences reaching those who had misjudged Alina's presence or underestimated her absence. At home, the house felt different. The furniture remained the same, but the energy had shifted. Richard moved through the rooms cautiously, aware now that the foundation he thought he had built was no longer unquestioned. Even his voice, once commanding, now carried hesitation. Alina spent her mornings at her desk, reviewing documents that had long been dormant. She read each line carefully, not as an administrator, but as someone intimately aware of responsibility. Each signature she encountered, each clause she examined, reminded her of the decades she had spent quietly sustaining the ambitions of others. Now those years were being recognized, not publicly, but in the workings of the very systems she had helped maintain. One afternoon, she received a call from a former colleague. His tone was hesitant at first, as if uncertain how to address her now. I just wanted to say thank you," he said, "for what you did years ago. It saved my career, my team. I never knew how to express it properly." Alina allowed herself a small, deliberate smile. "You don't need to. Just keep doing the right work, that's all that matters." As she hung up, Alina realized that respect was not demanded. It was noticed, and in noticing, it transformed. Richard appeared in the doorway of her study, the weight of weeks of realization etched across his face. "People, they're noticing," he said. "They're asking questions, about decisions, about influence, about you." "I've been here," Alina replied. "I've always been here, you just chose not to see." He looked away. The recognition in his expression was raw. He understood now that authority and power were never his alone, that much of what he had claimed was actually a reflection of her support and foresight. Alina returned to her papers, her hands steady. She had no desire to lecture, no need to assert dominance. The truth had a way of settling itself, and the structures she had quietly maintained were finally realigning to reflect reality. Over the next few days, small shifts became more apparent. Invitations Richard had relied on were rescinded quietly. Meetings once considered favorable now came with scrutiny. His influence, long assumed permanent, had subtly eroded. Alina observed without intervention, letting the natural course of accountability take its place. One evening, she walked through the neighborhood, enjoying the simple pleasure of unhurried movement. People she passed glanced at her differently now, no curiosity, no underestimation, only subtle acknowledgement. She did not stop to explain, there was no need. Back home, Alina reflected on the transformation, not of the world, but of herself. She realized that true empowerment did not come from public recognition or confrontation. It came from living fully in one's own truth, even when invisible, and allowing actions, steady, deliberate, uncompromising, to ripple outward. Richard, watching from the sidelines of his own diminishing authority, finally understood the cost of ignoring a quiet strength. And Alina, for the first time in decades, felt entirely free to occupy the space she had always deserved, untethered from expectation, unbound by invisibility, and entirely seen for herself. Alina moved through the days with a new rhythm, one that required no permission or validation. Each morning, she walked the city streets intentionally, noticing details she had ignored for decades: the curve of old brick buildings, the way sunlight caught glass panes, the rhythm of people hurrying with purpose. She observed without judgment, but with full awareness that life had a way of revealing its layers only to those willing to look. Back home, she arranged her workspace meticulously, not for others but for herself. The documents that had once been dormant now guided her choices, and she referred to them not for leverage, but for clarity. Every decision felt anchored in decades of experience that had never been acknowledged, yet now demanded recognition. She began reaching out selectively, connecting with colleagues and acquaintances who had long been overlooked or undervalued. Each interaction was measured, precise, and purposeful. It was not networking in the conventional sense, it was acknowledgement. Alina understood that influence need not be loud. It needed to be consistent, thoughtful, and intentional. Richard, meanwhile, continued to feel the subtle shifts in his environment. Invitations he had once expected no longer arrived. Partnerships he had relied upon became tentative. He confronted Alina one evening, his tone edged with frustration. "They're listening to you now," he said. "They actually seek your input." She looked up calmly, her expression even. "I've always contributed, you simply never noticed." The truth hung between them. No argument, no defensiveness, just clarity. Outside, the city seemed to respond to Alina's presence. She walked past a small community center where she had quietly volunteered years earlier, and the director greeted her with warmth, recognizing her contributions without need for explanation. That acknowledgement, subtle but undeniable, reinforced her awareness. Impact does not always need visibility, but it cannot remain unseen forever. Alina's evenings became dedicated to reflection and planning. She documented her experiences, organized her strategies, and considered the legacy she would leave behind. Every note she wrote was a reminder that her life's work, once invisible, was now fully recognized by those who understood its value. One afternoon, she met with a young professional who had recently joined the company she had once helped sustain. He sought advice, not instruction, and Alina provided it with measured patience. She guided him to recognize the importance of foresight, responsibility, and ethics, imparting lessons that extended beyond immediate tasks. By the end of the week, Alina had established a presence that was felt without being announced. Her influence was quiet but firm, a testament to the power of steadfast dedication. Richard observed from a distance, understanding that he could neither diminish nor claim what had always belonged to her. At night, Alina sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker. She felt neither triumph nor vengeance, only the steady satisfaction of alignment. She had reclaimed her space, her agency, and her recognition not through conflict, but through unwavering presence. And as the lights below pulsed with life, Alina knew that she no longer needed permission to exist fully. Her story, long overshadowed, was finally unfolding in its rightful place. Alina awoke that morning with a sense of calm she hadn't known in years. The sun filtered through the curtains, painting patterns on the floor that felt deliberate, as if the world itself had paused to allow clarity to settle. She moved through her morning rituals with purpose, each action deliberate, each thought measured. Her mailbox held letters that had arrived over the past few days, notes of gratitude from people she had quietly aided throughout her life. None were dramatic, none demanded attention, yet each carried weight. Alina read them slowly, understanding that acknowledgement need not be public to be meaningful. The CEO reached out again, this time requesting her insight on a complex project. She agreed to meet, not out of obligation, but out of recognition that her experience could guide decisions in ways that would benefit many. During their discussion, she spoke clearly, calmly, and decisively. Her perspective was respected, not questioned. For the first time, Alina felt the full measure of her influence, not inherited, not borrowed, but fully her own. Richard, observing these developments from the periphery, attempted to reclaim some semblance of authority. Invitations he had previously expected to command now arrived with hesitation, and meetings he had relied upon were approached with scrutiny. He approached Alina one evening, his voice edged with a mixture of resentment and disbelief. "You seem unstoppable," he said. She considered the observation carefully, replying, "I'm simply being myself. That has never required permission." Richard paused, realizing that his previous strategies, intimidation, charm, persuasion, no longer held sway. Alina's presence was steady, undeniable, and entirely independent of him. Over the next weeks, Alina continued to cultivate her autonomy. She engaged selectively with colleagues, guided projects with insight, and established connections built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Each action reinforced her agency, demonstrating that her contributions had always been essential, even when unrecognized. One evening, she attended a quiet gathering with a few colleagues and former acquaintances. Conversations were genuine, thoughtful, and unhurried. Eleanor spoke only when she had something of value to offer. And when she listened, she did so fully. She realized that her role no longer required validation or amplification. Her presence alone commanded attention. Back at home, Richard struggled to adjust. His attempts to assert control met only with Eleanor's composed responses. She no longer needed to justify herself or her decisions. Her clarity acted as its own boundary, one that could not be crossed by entitlement or expectation. As the days passed, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the nature of influence. True authority, she recognized, was built on consistency, integrity, and quiet perseverance. It did not need applause. It did not demand spectacle. Her life, once minimized, had become a testament to these truths. By the end of the month, Eleanor's position, social, professional, and personal, was firmly established. She no longer navigated the world defensively or cautiously. Instead, she moved with intention, grounded in the knowledge that her contributions mattered. Her presence was respected, and her story, long overshadowed, was unfolding exactly as it should. For Eleanor, this was the culmination of decades of patience, resilience, and unwavering integrity. The world had adjusted to her truth, and she, in turn, had stepped fully into the life she had always deserved. Her journey was not defined by revenge or retaliation, but by recognition, dignity, and the quiet, unstoppable power of living authentically. The morning light spilled into Eleanor's home with an unhurried clarity. It was a light that demanded nothing, yet promised everything. She moved through her space deliberately, each step measured, each thought precise. For the first time in decades, the home felt entirely hers, not shared, not contested, but claimed by presence and intention alone. Richard had left the previous night. His out-of-state opportunity had been accepted, though Eleanor suspected it was more a retreat than a plan. She did not rejoice in his absence. She simply noted it. The power she once lent silently was no longer a currency he could draw from. Eleanor prepared for the day differently now. She dressed not to conform, not to disappear, but to represent herself fully. Every choice, fabric, color, movement was deliberate. She glanced at the documents she had restored weeks earlier, the silent foundations of decisions she had influenced for decades. Today, they would guide her openly. The CEO arrived mid-morning, unannounced but expected. No pomp, no assistance. Just a meeting of two people whose history had quietly altered the direction of lives and institutions alike. "You're ready," he said simply. "I've never been unready," Eleanor replied. "I've only waited for the space to exist." They reviewed plans, considered succession, evaluated projects, all matters Eleanor had shaped long ago but never been allowed to claim. Now, every decision bore her insight openly, without attribution to anyone else. She felt the subtle thrill of recognition, tempered with a weight of responsibility. By noon, word of Eleanor's engagement in these matters spread quietly. No press releases, no dramatic announcements, just the reality of competence and influence asserting itself. Colleagues sought her counsel. Decisions she had long impacted from the shadows were now guided publicly by her hand. Richard's absence became a silent contrast to her presence. Invitations that once came to him were redirected. Partnerships he assumed he controlled now sought her insight. She observed without intervention, letting the natural consequence of history take its course. That evening, Eleanor stood on her terrace, watching the city stretch out below. Lights flickered like distant stars, a reminder that the world was vast, and yet she had found her own axis within it. She thought of the years she had minimized herself, the decades she had offered guidance invisibly. The cost had been immense, but the outcome was undeniable. She was finally recognized for what she had always been. Her phone rang once. She answered without hesitation. It was the young professional she had mentored months earlier, seeking guidance for a challenging project. Eleanor listened, advised, and encouraged. When the call ended, she felt no exhaustion, only satisfaction. Impact, she realized, was most enduring when it empowered others. As night fell, the house was quiet. Eleanor poured herself a cup of tea and moved to the window. She watched the street below, people moving, unaware of the subtle realignments taking place in their city. Some were her colleagues, some her friends, others strangers whose lives were touched by decisions she had long shaped quietly. She reflected on the transformation. It had not been sudden, it had not been loud, but it was absolute. Authority, influence, recognition, these were no longer borrowed or assumed. They were earned, quietly, deliberately, persistently. Eleanor's gaze turned inward. She acknowledged the years of sacrifice, patience, and discretion. She recognized herself fully, no longer defined by roles imposed upon her, no longer constrained by invisibility. Her life, long overshadowed, had finally unfolded as it was meant to. The city hummed softly, indifferent yet alive. And in that rhythm, Alina understood something profound. True power did not demand acknowledgement, it revealed itself through presence. She set down her cup, feeling the weight of decades lift. Tomorrow would bring new decisions, new opportunities, and perhaps challenges. But Alina faced them unafraid, unbound, fully herself. For the first time, she was not just surviving, she was rising. And in that rise, decades of quiet strength, patience, and unseen influence converged into a life wholly, unapologetically hers.